And lastly, for classes, we have Warrior, starting with Bumper Car. A 2-cost 1/3 rush. Death Rattle add 2 1/1 riders with rush to your hand. Now, obviously, this is pretty powerful with the rush payoff that we'll see in a little bit with ETC. By itself, I think this is pretty weak, right? You know, like a 2-cost 1/3 rush is like meh. You're not like killing very much with it. You have to have some sort of synergy going on that you care about this being mech, or you care about like having multiple rush minions, or just multiple minions, right? Maybe you're using this with Hultmaster and drawing a bunch of stuff. Maybe you're buffing mechs somehow or whatever. By itself, I think this is a pretty mediocre standalone, but with buffs, with like baton or other sort of hand buff style stuff, this can obviously be a bit more powerful. I think the big synergy you're looking for here is just the fact that it's essentially creating 3 rush minions for 1 card and for 4 mana, which makes it very powerful alongside ETC, which I think is a pretty interesting direction to look at going with Warrior. And here's ETC. ETC, God of Metal. Kind of funny. 2-cost 1/4. After a friendly rush minion attacks, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So like I said, having cheap minions that give you cheap minions with rush is potentially really powerful here. If you somehow just attack with 10 rush minions in a turn, your opponent takes 20, right? That's pretty crazy, right? Obviously 10 is like a ton of rush minions. I think that this is definitely like an interesting card to like give you the ability to use rush, like having like rush sort of theme-ish deck that gets more of a payoff. Because there's really not that much like rush payoff. Like imagine using this though with Bumper Car and Playmaker, right? You play ETC into Playmaker into Bumper Car. Your bumper cars, you get 2 bumper cars. They both come into play, they both die. They give you 4 of the riders. You play a rider, it gives you 2 riders, you attack. They all just die and kill your opponent. Like, cause like you spend 5 mana to set up ETC Playmaker, 2 mana for bumper car. So you get 2 bumper cars. And you spend 3 more, so you get what is that? You end up with 8. That's 8 minions attacking, right? 8 rush minions, so it's kind of sick. It's 16 damage for 10 mana. But like this is like just like kind of all these are sort of like decent cards to begin with, right? Like that can be used to control the board, and this is the only one that's like only part of the like kill combo. It's not like a 1-turn kill, right? But like it's a bunch of stuff that independently has value to control the board, and that can ultimately end up like giving you the ability to blow up your opponent if they're playing some sort of control deck. But anyway, I just think it's an interesting card. I'm going to definitely experiment with it. Like I've played way too much Playmaker in duels, because like that like the Playmaker value ends up being hilarious to me all the time in duels. And then be able to like explode people with ETC alongside it seems especially sweet. Next up, we have Feat of Strength. Give a random taunt minion in your hand +5/+5. Meh. If you have like a specific giant taunt minion, a specific like high value taunt minion, maybe this is sweet. It's pretty expensive though. 3 mana to do it is like kind of a lot of mana. I mean, there is already like give all taunt minions in your hand +2/+2 into the fray, and then you have this. Maybe you like buff like a Tomb Warden enormously. Then you just get like silenced, or you get your taunts ignored. Your opponent just gets you. I don't know. I feel like it is a lot of stats, right? 5-cost or 3-cost +5/+5 for something in your hand is a lot, but I feel like there's just like so many ways to get around just like stats these days that it feels like this is going to be a tough card to make work. I tried to make Into the Fray work so many times, and this is like just another buff thing. You kind of need like more actual like generation of like dudes, more card draw, not just like more ways to make your individual dudes even bigger. So I doubt this will really see play, but I'm sure I'll try another like Into the Fray Feat of Strength deck just to make gigantic Tomb Wardens, and then just die anyway. Next is Minefield. A 2-cost spell, deal 5 damage randomly split among all minions. It's actually like a pretty good AoE effect, right? This is a pretty good just like early game, board clear, it feels like. I know that they specifically mentioned that this was like a card that got redesigned fairly late. It was going to be a bomb related card, and then they changed that when Bomb Warrior was seeing significant play already without the additional card. This was like kind of like like Dynomatic, right? Was a very heavily played card. Obviously, there's a big difference between a minion attached to an effect and just a spell, but being able to like just deal 5 to the board for like 2 can very easily allow a control warrior deck to survive early turns where it would typically fall behind and then need to rely on like brawl or weapons or whatever. I just think this is a solid card for a controlling warrior deck, or for like a mid-range-ish warrior deck that's looking to shore up the early game against aggressive decks. It's just a very good card for any kind of deck that's looking to bridge those early turns. So I do think this will see a pretty significant amount of play if those are decks that end up having enough support in general. Next up, we have Ringmaster's Baton, a 2-cost 1/3 weapon. After a hero attacks, give a mech, dragon, and pirate in your hand +1/+1. New Menagerie is here, and I always love these sort of cards, these sort of effects that push you in a particular direction to look at cards for type tags, etc. Maybe you end up playing like Ringmaster's Baton plus Ringmaster in like a Yashiraj deck, or not a Yashiraj deck, in a Zoth deck, and like look to have like, big payoff for that Menagerie stuff. Maybe you're just playing tempo, right? Maybe you're using the Ringmaster's Baton to like, get those buffs and win the board like mid-range-ish tempo style. Obviously, the weapon itself is not doing that much, right? But you're getting a lot of value out of the weapon if you get all the swings off. And maybe you're playing like pirates and upgrading this, right? Maybe the pirates that you're looking to buff are stuff like Captain Greenskin, so you get additional attacks off of this. Like, what you care about most is the attacks off of this, getting those buffs, rather than like obviously the impact of the weapon. But being able to use stuff like Upgrade or Krastanov to get extra attacks from this seems very, very powerful. So this seems like a really strong card that obviously supports a particular strategy. And the fact that this is not legendary, right? Sounds kind of like a legendary effect, but this is actually a card you can include 2 of in your deck. So a lot more payoff to running that sort of menagerie-ish mech dragon pirate strategy. So I definitely think this will see play, and I will certainly be playing it. And the Ringmaster himself, Ringmaster Watley, 5-cost 3/5, battlecry, draw a mech dragon and pirate. So basically, new curator, he's going the mech pirate direction rather than the Murloc beast direction. Doesn't have taunt, but is significantly cheaper. And I think the fact that he is cheaper really helps enable the baton early. And you can even see the baton in his hand. There it is, the Ringmaster's Baton in the Ringmaster's hand. I see it. I get it. Obviously, like, this body is not particularly good, so you're going to have tools that are keeping you, alive and in the game, like perhaps your cars that you're buffing up with your Ringmaster's Baton and rushing your opponent's minions down while you're actually getting to the point where you're stabilizing and then able to leverage those that card draw and those buffs to win the game. Next up is Stage Dive. 1-cost, draw a rush minion. Corrupt, give it +2/+1. So this is kind of a weird card. Like you're unless you're just like trying to play this on 1, it's basically always going to be corrupted, right? But like frequently one of the things that make it appealing to play 1-cost cards is that you can play them on 1. How exciting is this? But I guess if you're playing like a deck with a lot of like cheap stuff, you could play like a turn 2 thing, enabling this, then you play this, and then you get to play another 2 alongside it. I mean, you don't have to corrupt this, right? If you really need to, you could just use it and go get a rush minion right away. But obviously, you'd much rather get the corrupt value off of it. So, I mean, like, the fact that it is specifically drawing rush minion, if you have a limited number of rush minions in your deck, maybe you have like Kargath. Maybe you're playing like Wild, you have like Kargath Ziliax, right? That's kind of sick. But yeah, I'm not like 100% sure of this card. It is like, it's super cheap and it's card draw, right? So like, there's very little downside to playing it. Like, compare it to Town Crier, right? Obviously, Town Crier gave you board presence, and you could just easily play it in 1. But like, part of the value of Town Crier was that it ensured that you were going to draw your minions. You're gonna actually draw your rush minions. Maybe you play this in like Galakron Warrior, and you basically only play Scions, and you're trying to like corrupt buff your Scions. Maybe you play like just Scions and like Kargath or something, right? So you're getting things that like can leverage the buff pretty well and that are high impact. So you're just ensuring that you're getting your most important and best cards because they are specific class of stuff with the rush on the rush tag. So it's an interesting card. I do think that this will probably see a good amount of play, and part of that I think will be just ensuring that you draw those specific key minions in the right decks. Next up is Stagehand. A 2-cost 3/2 mech, battlecry, give a random minion in your hand +1/+1. Sort of a weird card. This plus the Ringmaster's Baton. There's a lot of hand buff. There's not that many warrior minions that specifically care a lot about like their stats in your hand, right? It's not like we have stuff like Dispatch Kodo style cards. And this, like a 2-cost like 3/2 is like pretty bad. It dies to a lot of stuff. So like you have to really care about being able to leverage the buffs, I think, to want to really include this in your deck. So my gut instinct, this is not a particularly compelling card, that it won't see a lot of play because it doesn't have any immediate impact on the board. Unless there were things that you really want to buff. It seems like this is something that you probably end up leaving at home. Next up is Sword Eater. This guy's pretty great, I think. 4-cost 2/5 taunt. Battlecry, equip a 3/2 sword. Like this card actually just seems so strong to me. You know, like you're getting, like, compare this to the Arathi Weaponsmith. Obviously, Arathi Weaponsmith just kind of sucks, and it's a card that hasn't really been competitive for a long time. But you're getting a 3/2 sword and a 2/5 taunt for 4 mana. It's really high impact. It's also something that you can easily buff with the Ringmaster's Baton. So, you know, because it is a high health taunt, you get a bunch of extra buffs on it. You know, you can get this back with, like, you know, N'Zoth. It's a taunt pirate with like decent stats. It just seems like a really solid card. I expect this to be like a absolute mainstay of any of the like menagerie style decks, and probably just like a pirate warrior card, right? Like this just seems like a really solid card that you play in like an aggro deck. It protects your other guys and gives you a weapon to attack your opponent in the face. It just seems really good. So this I think is like possibly like the just like best all-around warrior card in the entire set. Next up, we have Tent Trasher. 5-cost 5/5 Rush Dragon. Costs 1 less for each friendly minion with a unique minion type. I think this is, you know, obviously another payoff for menagerie-style decks. Can be the dragon that you're getting from your Ringmaster Watley. Can get buffed, so rushing in for even more than 5. Obviously, also an incentive to not just play like, okay, I'm playing just these minion types, right? There's the amalgam that does exist, the like Circus Amalgam, who's yet another minion type. I think it's like a pretty decent payoff, but like the problem is that this card is like Rush is often at its best when you are behind, and this is bad when you're behind because your minions are dead. This is very good for solidifying an advantage. So you'd really want to play this in like a tempo menagerie-ish deck, and less in like a control mid-rangey menagerie-ish deck, because you want your minions to, you know, your board to be like sticking, and you know, you being the one who's ahead. It feels like a very snowball-y type card. If you're ahead, this just continues to keep you ahead by killing your opponent's minions. But if you're behind, it's not bad because it's still 5/5 rush for 5, which isn't horrible, but it's pretty slow and a little bit awkward. So this, my understanding is the interaction this would have with Amalgam is that the Amalgam would just reduce it by 1. I am slightly curious that whether two Amalgams reduce it by 2, but my guess it would be still only reduce it by 1 because its minion type is technically all. So I'm not totally sure. I think I'm pretty certain that because it says each friendly minion with a unique minion type, that it would only count a singular Amalgam as 1, but I'm not sure if it would count 2 Amalgams as 2 or still just 1. Overall, I think, you know, pretty solid card. Definitely wants to be in a tempo style menagerie deck, which is frankly where I feel a lot of the menagerie cards are pushing with the hand buff style theme with the baton anyway. So definitely a strategy that I enjoy, and definitely one that I will be checking out. All right, we are on to the final group of cards for our review for Madness at the Darkmoon Faire. The neutral cards. And normally neutrals are like, okay, we can just go through a lot of this, a lot of less exciting stuff, but we've got 4 old gods in here we're going to be talking about, so a lot of exciting things in the neutral category. We're going to start, though, with Banana Vendor. I looked at this and I was like, did they reprint this? And I was like, oh no, it's actually, that was Banana Buffoon. This is Banana Vendor. So this is a 3-cost 2/4 with Battlecry, add 2 bananas to each player's hand, rather than the 3-cost 2/2, which was 2 bananas to your hand. This, you know, I think has still some reasonable potential to be used in decks that care quite a bit about the spells. You know, this can be used with, you know, Sorcerer's Apprentice, like mana cyclone shenanigans. It can be used with priest cards that discount your cards when you play spells. It can be used with Sethic Veilweaver to get extra stuff. You can get, you know, there's a lot of synergies with cheap spells and cheap spells that target minions, in particular in the case of priests. So, I think this is, a card that isn't necessarily something you'd ever just like play in your deck, right? Like giving your opponent bananas that they can possibly use before you can use yours, pretty weak. But there's lots of tools that can use this synergistically that I think could be quite powerful, especially like alongside stuff like Source Apprentice, etc. So, and not to mention the fact that you can use this to potentially glut your opponent's hand. If you're playing as a control deck, you can play Banana Vendor and overdraw them, but probably not going to just be played for that purpose. Likely to be just sort of an incidental thing that happens when you're playing it specifically to use those for synergies. If you don't know, bananas are 1-cost spells that give a minion +1/+1, much like the ones that come off of Mukla and so on. Next up, we have Carnival Clown, a 9-cost 4/4 with Taunt. Battlecry, summon 2 copies of this. Corrupt, fill your board with copies. So this is an interesting card. Obviously, Corrupt, you need to have played a 10-cost thing or change the cost of this. You can use it with like Book of Lunacy or whatever, or Deck of Chaos or whatever it is, to swap it, and then you can play something that costs more than it, and then boom, play it out. Kind of interesting. You can also use this with like Revolve in Shaman. You can get even just like 4/10 mana, without even corrupting it. You could play this and get 3 9-drops. Pretty sweet. Obviously, that's a lot of mana. That's 10 mana, and there's no real way in that to like end up discounting this or corrupting this. But could be interesting for sure. I think this is like a pretty neat card overall. Unlikely to see a lot of play outside of those sort of like meme attempts. Maybe use this with like a druid deck with like Survival, right? You cast Survival, which corrupts this, and then you play 9-cost board full of 8/8s. That's kind of cool, but that's kind of asking a lot too. Like there's a lot of cards that are powerful once you've already played a 10-cost spell, and yeah. Next up is Circus Amalgam. I referred to this quite a bit, especially during the Warrior section. 4-cost 4/5 with Taunt and all minion types. So this is obviously a pretty sweet card for those Menagerie style decks. But it is a card that is very, very vulnerable to Zephrys decks because it can just get crabbed. I think that this is a card that will not really just see play like incidentally as like a dude for in part that reason, because any deck that has Zephrys, any Highlander deck can just eat this very easily for a grand total of 3 mana and their Zephrys. If you are playing a deck that specifically does care about having a bunch of minion types, whether you're say a N'Zoth deck or just a Baton Warrior deck, can definitely be pretty powerful. Certainly would be powerful if they added it to Battlegrounds, but I don't expect that to happen. I think they said during the reveal stream that they were planning on keeping the Amalgam style cards around tier 6, so maybe we'll see them there. But for now, in Standard, I think this card will see a decent amount of play, but not an outrageous amount of play. It is like just a giant Murloc if you're playing like a Murloc deck too. I was talking a little bit about how that 3/4. Just as a 3/4 was pretty appealing. This being a 4/5 taunt, also works in like Dragon Paladin, Dragon Murloc Paladin. It can fill a lot of holes in a lot of different decks. So, I think it certainly has the ability to be like that sort of multi-tribe glue for multi-tribe decks, or for just single tribe decks that don't necessarily have access to a decently sized taunt in the middle of the game. So, I do think this card will see quite a bit of play and get eaten by a lot of crabs. Next up is Circus Medic. 4-cost 3/4 with Battlecry, restore 4 health, and Corrupt, deal 4 damage instead. Sort of a weird card. Typically, if you're playing a deck that wants healing from something, you want healing from it. Maybe this ends up being a card that you play in like Quest Shaman, and you have this possibly as something which can heal you and keep you alive, and then once you like turn the corner and are in the late game, you can just blow your opponent up. It's kind of interesting. I don't really see this as probably seeing play elsewhere though. Like I think that if you're gonna be playing this, it's probably gonna be something like Quest Shaman, because I don't really see that much other exciting places to put this. It's not really that great. Like it's fine if you power this on, but if you're not getting double battle cries, it feels like it's a lot worse to me. So especially for 4 mana, like compare this to like either side. Like there's like things that you can have Battlecry deal damage or Battlecry restore health that are better options at a variety of costs. Obviously you're not going to get like 4 costs deal 4, but like for a Battlecry just by itself. But this isn't quite 4-cost deal 4 because you have to corrupt it. So I feel like if it does see play, it'll be in Quest Shaman, but probably not anywhere else. Next up is Claw Machine, a 6/3 6-cost rush with Death Rattle, draw a minion and give it +3/+3. This is actually kind of an interesting card, right? Like, it's a mech, so if you're playing a deck that like is looking for like a mech for, say, N'Zoth, or if you like actually have, you know, ways to leverage mechs like Oblivitron, maybe this is like Death Rattle Hunter, right? You know, like you kill your opponent's thing, you get in like another minion, big minion, kill it again. Like, maybe you actually have enough tools to like make the mech elements of Death Rattle Hunter like come together, you know, between like Ursatron, Oblivitron, the Tonk, this. Maybe you can put it together. Maybe there's the tools. Are we there? Have we found it? Mech Hunter after Boomsday's gone? Next up, we have Costumed Entertainer. 2-cost 1/2. Battlecry, give a random minion in your hand +2/+2. It's interesting that like we've come so far from hand buffs, right? It used to be that this was something that only the Grimy Goons could do, right? The Grimy Goons, they were so good at it, and they had like a 2/4 for 3 that gave a guy like was it even +1/+1? I don't know. I feel like this is probably just not a very good card. Preemptively giving something +2/+2 is pretty powerful, but you know, it's a 2-cost 1/2, pretty understated overall. Unless you like really care about hand buffing, I find it pretty unlikely that this is going to find its way anywhere. But maybe you're like trying to build some sort of weird OTK that's like buffing something and copying it, but otherwise doesn't really seem like something it's likely to see much play. And I see people saying, "Oh, why isn't this a Murloc?" Look, it's costume. It's not really a Murloc. You see the non-Murloc right there inside. You were tricked by the costume. It's clearly an excellent costume, but not an excellent card. Next up, we have Cthulhu the Shattered. This is one of the old gods, and one of the cards that made me have to do the most setup for this stream, because 10-cost, start of game, break into pieces. Those pieces are here, 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 and here. At the beginning of the game, you shuffle 4 pieces of Cthulhu into your deck, which are Eye of Cthulhu, 5-cost spell that deals 7 damage randomly split among all enemies. 6-cost 6/6 Taunt Body, a 5-cost spell that deals 3 to all minions, then a 5-cost spell that destroys a minion. Once you play all of them, you get to shuffle Cthulhu the Shattered into your deck. And then when you draw Cthulhu the Shattered, the battle cry is deal 30 damage randomly split among all enemies. It's really slow. Really slow. Oh, apparently it's actually a spell that costs 5 that summons a body that's 6/6. But whatever. There it is. Yeah, you have to play all of them, and and once you actually play all 4 of them, you then shuffle a 10-cost card into your deck. So I think it's, you know, it's pretty clearly a tough way to win a game. It's an interesting way because, you know, you eventually do Battlecry, deal 30 damage, which if your opponent doesn't have anything in play, they are dead. And all of the fragment pieces are like okay. They're not great. That's one of the things. Like, none of them are fantastic, right? They are like 5-cost, kill a minion. It's not very good, right? 5-cost, deal 7 randomly. That's okay. That's like, you know, around Avenging Wrath. 5-cost, deal 3 to everything. Okay. 5-cost, make a 6/6 taunt. Okay. All okay. But none of them are good, right? And then you eventually get Cthulhu and win the game. So you have to draw a bunch of cards and play a bunch of cards that like are mostly like mediocre and not like, not get anything countered. If someone counters one of your pieces, I think you're in trouble too. You know, on the reveal stream, they were playing this with like Rogue that played like Saboteur, so you could dig them up out of your deck, which is kind of cool. And then, you know, but even then, like, you have to dig them up out of your deck, cast them all, and then again dig up Cthulhu. So it's a little bit of an awkward spot overall. You know, I do think that it definitely will see play among people who are like just trying to get that like, you know, dramatic meme win, and it is a like win condition for like a, you know, control oriented deck, right? Because, you know, it gives you some protection from fatigue because it's putting extra cards in your deck, right? And then it's also a 30 damage battle cry once you actually get to it. So if you're playing, you know, there's definitely ways to make it work with a deck that's like largely just focused on staying alive and playing the, you know, the rest of the game out. So like maybe like a control priest win condition, like you play control priest and just try and kill all their stuff and eventually blow them Cthulhu. Maybe it's like, you know, combo rogue deck that's looking to accelerate and draw everything as quickly as possible. You know, all of that is a possible direction. I don't think it'll likely end up being very competitive, but it does seem like it is at least very sweet. And I'm sure a lot of people will be trying to do it, much like the Cthulhu of old. All right, next up we have Darkmoon Dirigible, a 3-cost 3/2 Divine Shield with Corrupt Gain Rush. This is just going into all of my Paladin dual decks instead of Scarlet Crusader. But no, this is actually a pretty sweet card. You know, 3-cost 3/2 Divine Shield is actually not that bad. And, you know, Corrupt Gain Rush, okay. Like a 3-power Rush Divine Shield is actually like not bad. I doubt this is like gonna really see play. But it's like almost, it's like kind of at the cusp, right? Like maybe you know, just really want like some sort of like Divine Shield Rush minion in a deck that can't easily get it. Maybe you really want a mech in like, you know, some sort of tribal style deck. Maybe this goes into like the, you know, the warrior baton decks, because you could easily corrupt it with your pirate, and then you have a 3/2 Divine Shield Rush, which is pretty strong. Could be. So yeah, I think this is like not quite good enough to just see play naturally, but the fact that it does have the mech tag, I think is a pretty big factor in its favor in kind of the tribal menagerie-ish mechanics that we can see in the format so far. Next up, we have Darkmoon Rabbit. We're going to play this with Deck of Chaos. Then it's a 1-cost rush, poisonous, kills everything. This card's just pretty funny, obviously, right? Like, clearly it's intended as a total meme card, but it's a beast for a N'Zoth deck that clears your opponent's board, clears once your opponent's board, right? How many of you out there, when you were a kid, watched the movie version of Watership Down, which was like horrifying as a child? There was all this like bloody battles among like rabbits. That's what this reminds me of. Like the Watership Down nightmares that I had as a kid when I watched that, and I was like, oh my God, like that gave me PTSD. And now I'm looking at Darkmoon Rabbit, and I know that this is actually a reference to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but that's not what it is to me. What it gives me is horrible flashbacks to like the blood splattering on the screen when I was a small child watching Watership Down. I gotta go past it. We gotta move on. Next up, we have Darkmoon Statue. 3-cost 0/5. Your other minions have +1 attack. Corrupt this gains +4 attack. Kind of an interesting card. You know, if you maybe have a swarm deck, this can like buff all your like all your recruits or whatever. It's an 0/5. Doesn't necessarily die immediately, but if you corrupt it as a 4/5, this actually as a 4/5 is pretty powerful, but as a 0/5 is pretty bad. I don't know. Maybe this is something that you actually like play in like token like Silverhand Recruit Paladin, which by the way has air raid, despite what I was saying at the beginning of the Paladin section, and you corrupt it by playing like your True Silver or like, you know, your balloon dude, balloon peddler guy, and then you just go in. You have a 3-cost 4/5 that buffs all your other minions. Seems pretty good. Probably not quite good enough, but I think it's borderline. I think it's actually kind of borderline. Maybe it goes in like the versions of like token Demon Hunter with all the rush guys, the Illidari. Because you can play your like command the Illidari, upgrade this, then play this, then smash them with all your little deads. Oh, it's pretty interesting. All right, next up, Derailed Coaster. 5-cost 3/2. Battlecry, summon a 1/1 rider with rush for each minion in your hand. That's kind of interesting. So you just have like a ton of minions. Like say you have 4 minions in your hand. This is a 3/2 that gives you 4 rush guys. Probably not good enough. Maybe this goes in like Book of Specters. Maybe you play this with like ETC plus this, plus Battle Rage, drawing you a bunch of stuff. Could be interesting. Probably not good enough, but could be interesting. It's the only place I'd really see that. Next up, we have Fantastic Firebird. 4-cost 3/5 Wind Fury Elemental. Meh. You know, like maybe you need an elemental somewhere. Maybe you're playing this in like Tempo Elemental Mage. And you just like, you know, I mean, a 4-cost 3/5 Wind Fury isn't terrible, but probably not good enough. The fact that it doesn't have any impact on the board immediately, like it's very difficult for cards that don't have an impact on the board immediately that cost more than like 2 or 3, or like generate value even if they die right away, to really end up finding a home, right? Like just a combination of stats and the keyword not being taunt, is rarely enough to actually end up making a card good enough. And I don't think this quite makes it. This one though, Fleethoof Pearl Tusk, 5-cost 4/4 rush with corrupt, get +4/+4. So it turns it into an 8/8 rush, and it's a beast. So this can easily go into like, an Azoth control deck or a Yashraj control deck where you're getting 8/8 rushes for 5. Smush, smush, smush. This is like, one of the simplest and yet also like I think highest impact corrupt minions around. I think it's actually a pretty solid card. Like 8/8 rush for 5. You can play this in like a control deck, right? Like this can actually be like a card that gets played in like Control Priest, right? Because you just like, play, I don't know, some expensive things, and then your opponent plays like a big minion. You're like, all right, Pearl Tusk, rush it, heal my guy. Pearl Tusk, play Apotheosis on it, heal for 10, kill your thing, gain, a bunch of life. It seems pretty solid. Like this, I think, is just a very, very solid card in like mid-range / control decks, even if they're not necessarily caring about the beast tag, or the corrupt tag for like a Yashraj or whatever. I think it'd be a pretty solid card in general. Maybe you play this in like mid-range hunter and you like end up, getting this with like Tundra Rhino and just kill them because you have an 8/8 for 5. I don't know. I think it's definitely a pretty solid card, and certainly, has the potential to show up in a variety of different competitive decks. Next up is Gyre Worm. 3-cost 3/2 elemental with Battle Cry. Play an elemental last turn, deal 3 damage. Well, there's not that many classes that have elemental stuff going on. This is obviously pretty powerful. Battle Cry, deal 3. If you're tempoing out elementals, this could go into, a Shaman deck. There's a bunch of elementals in Shaman, whether it's like the new one who draws you a weapon. There's like Surging Tempest is an elemental. It's very good in Mage. Obviously, there's tons of tools in Mage to be elemental. I think it's just a very solid card if there's enough elementals to support what you're looking to do. I feel like it's probably only Mage and Shaman that are likely to care about this, to have like enough elementals to lean on it. Maybe you have elementals in Quest Shaman, right? I don't know if there's like necessarily like enough overall support for Quest Elemental Shaman, but this is a great tool alongside like Cumulo Maximus, even more burn to end up making that deck tick. So I think that it is unlikely to see play elsewhere, because I can't really think of anywhere else that you end up having enough elemental synergy tools available, but I think those are 2 possible homes, Shaman and Mage. Next up is Horrendous Growth. This card's pretty funny. 2-cost 2/2 corrupt, get +1/+1, can be corrupted endlessly, much like the children. Endlessly corrupted. No, but I think this is like just a neat card. I find it unlikely that this card ever actually sees significant competitive play, but I do think that, it's a sweet card that it does exist. The fact that, we'll see like highlight reels of like, can you get your Horrendous Growth to like 30-30, 50-50? I don't know. I'm just really curious to see like what people do with it. I doubt it'll actually be any good, but it will be a sweet meme, that's for sure. Next up is Inconspicuous Rider, a 3-cost 2/2 that's actually 2 children in a trench coat. Battlecry, cast a secret from your deck. I think this is just a solid card, right? Like, compare this to Mad Scientist, right? Mad Scientist was a 2-cost 2/2 Death Rattle, put a secret into play. This is like Mad Scientist, a little bit more expensive, obviously, but immediately triggers. I think this is just a good card. It could be used in Rogue or Hunter or Mage, probably not necessarily in Paladin. Paladin secrets are like the lowest impact. It's 3 gnomes. I only see the 2 gnomes. I guess the top person's also a gnome and not like a fake head. I guess it is 3 gnomes in a trench coat. But regardless, I just think it's a good card, right? There's like lots of secret synergy stuff that we've seen in the set so far, whether it's Petting Zoo or the various secret synergy cards in Mage. It thins your deck, gets you more likely to draw your higher impact stuff. It's just a really good card, I think. Any sort of secret deck, except for maybe, I'm not sure Rogue really would care about it, because Rogue actually specifically does care quite a bit about playing the secrets from your hand for Hanar, and not necessarily just getting them into play. But certainly I expect to see this played in like potentially like Secret Mage and or Secret Hunter. Next up is Knife Vendor, a 4-cost 3/4 Battlecry, deal 4 damage to each hero. Ugh. I wouldn't buy a knife, just like had to stab myself with it. Seems like a dangerous fairground vendor. But I mean, this could theoretically just be like a decent aggro card? Probably not. You know, it's 3/4 for 4. If it's like a 4/4 for 4, maybe this would be like, you know, something you just play in an aggro deck. It just seems like kind of medium. Doesn't seem quite good enough to me. Maybe you care about damaging yourself. Maybe this is like somehow in a self-damage deck. It's not even like an efficient minion, right? Like dealing damage to yourself as like priest to like, you know, like maybe you deal damage to yourself as priest to like get like a more, you know, more stats or whatever. It's a lot of damage. Don't get me wrong. Like 4 is a lot of damage. Maybe this just goes into like a ultra aggro rogue deck or ultra aggro mage deck with a bunch of other burn spells. It is a lot of damage and leaves the body around as well. But I don't know. Seems like there's probably better option in class cards, but maybe this ends up being like, you know, a one of in like some sort of like aggro deck. Next up we have Fear Ritualist. 3-cost 3/4 taunt with battle cry at a random, or no, sorry, 3-cost 4/4 taunt. I don't know why I said 3/4. 3-cost 4/4 taunt battle cry at a random 4-cost minion to your opponent's hand. This is like an interesting card. Like 4/4 taunt for 3 is pretty big. And yes, it gives your opponent like a minion, but they have to like play it, right? It's reasonably efficient, but it is obviously pretty bad in any sort of value situation. Hard to evaluate. Like obviously you're generally giving your opponent stuff that's you know, that's going to be good into it. Kind of feels like it's something like, this is like the sort of like Tar Creeper-ish minion that like is, well, Tar Creeper at least initially was concepted as like, hey, this is an aggro minion, or this is a anti-aggro minion. It's a taunt minion that you won't play in aggro decks. But this is like, this you just play in an aggro deck to protect your smaller minions from people attacking, right? Like this isn't put it into play, it's put a 4-cost minion into your opponent's hand. So you can very easily like play this as like a solidly statted 3-drop that protects your other minions in play. I think this is likely to actually just be like a good aggro card. I don't know. We'll see. That's my feelings, though. I think this feels like it's the sort of thing that is good at protecting your smaller minions from your opponent's attackers while having good stats itself, and hoping your opponent doesn't have time to take advantage of the value you're giving them. Next up is N'Zoth, God of the Deep. 10-cost 5/7. Battlecry, resurrect a friendly minion of each minion type. So I've talked about this quite a bit as we've been talking about various cards. I think it's one of the most interesting cards in the entire set. Really causes any class to evaluate how you build your deck, both in terms of minion types, as well as like, okay, you know, do I want to only include, like, do I want to try and include like the highest impact things of each minion type? Do I want to try and like include like specifically rush or taunt minions, so I have like stuff that gives me board presence, you know, like immediately upon playing the N'Zoth that can actually do something to impact the board? Are there powerful like death rattles that are in specific tribes and everything they can bring back? I think it's a super cool card. So obviously like old N'Zoth was like just death rattles, right? And then it was like, okay, I want to like, you know, play a bunch of death rattles and bring up a bunch of high impact death rattles. This one, you know, asks you to go like kind of a little bit deeper and like, okay, what do I want for my mech, for my beast, for my elemental, for my pirate, you know? Yeah, I just think this is a very, very solid and super interesting card. I love this style of design. It makes people look at elements of cards they might not necessarily look at otherwise. You know, like I was talking about this when I was talking about like Fizzy Elemental, right? Fizzy, whatever it is, the 10/10 rush taunt. It's like, well, probably not a card they would normally think about playing, but it's an elemental in a class that doesn't really have many elementals, and it's really high impact. It comes back with N'Zoth. But yeah, so I think that this will likely be one of the centerpiece cards of a lot of decks throughout its life cycle in the expansion. It's obviously like a, you know, huge recovery tool / curve topper for lots and lots of different potential strategies. So super excited that it exists, and I will certainly be playing a lot with it, and I'm sure other people will too. Next up, we have Optimistic Ogre. 5-cost 6/7. Really good stats for the cost. 50% chance to attack the correct enemy. I like how they changed it, because it used to be 50% to attack the wrong enemy. Now it's like 50% to attack the correct enemy. But yeah, we got our ogre. I mean, you know, we're not gonna really see this played, I'm sure. I would say maybe it's an arena card, but arena is a game mode? Since when? But yeah, it's not gonna see play. But it's sweet. Parade Leader. 2-cost 2/3. After you summon a rush minion, give it +2 attack. Maybe this is a card that goes into, you know, those like ETC decks I was talking about. A bunch of ways to make a bunch of like, you know, small rush minions, better ways to take advantage of them. Probably not super likely, but maybe this goes in like, you know, the Command the Illidari deck, something like that. Ways to get better use out of all of those things. But yeah, could be interesting. Definitely like possible places to see this find a home. But none of them really seem like they have the tools right now. I think the most promising of all of them is probably something like the ETC deck, but overall, not super optimistic on the chances of this seeing play, much like the previous optimistic Ogre. Next up is Prize Vendor. 2-cost 2/3 Murloc. Battlecry, both players draw a card. We're not in the mill rogue world. We are in the very slowly mill world. But yeah, the fact that this is only one card obviously makes it very difficult in Coldblood Oracle. It doesn't really generate cards, it just replaces itself. I mean, I could easily see this, as a 2/3 Murloc for 2. Maybe this sees play in like Murloc decks because it's a decent stat line for a Murloc, that you're more likely to be able to keep around than most Murlocs that are like weaker overall stat-wise, and helps refuel your hand. Maybe you're hoping that you're able to kill your opponent with your Murloc Death Ball and critical mass of buffs and such before they can take advantage of the extra cards you're giving them. So I think it's actually like potentially just okay in like a proactive Murloc style deck. Maybe this is something that you just put in like Quest Shaman because it's a decent stat line. It digs you closer to, your key cards. It's a battle cry. I think there's definitely possible homes for this. I think this is one of the cards that I actually am more optimistic about among the kind of generally less impressive neutral commons that I think could see play. Next up, Rock Rager. This guy's just like, yeah, rock on, man. Magma Rager, eat your heart out. Poor Magma Rager. But yeah, a 5/1 taunt for 2. Still pretty bad, but it is. I do like to see the Rager memes continuing. He is raging much more than the Rager, but he is not making me rage, for I love the Ragers. Next up, we have Safety Inspector. 1-cost 1/3. Battlecry, shuffle the lowest cost card from your hand into your deck, draw a card. It's pretty interesting. This can obviously be used with, certain like combos. If you like, have a piece that you're like digging for certain pieces, this can like accelerate you through your deck, but it obviously costs you additional card. It can be used to put stuff into your deck to draw with like Stowaway if you're playing Rogue, for instance. It basically just allows you to mulligan. Like, all right, I don't want it. I want to go in. But yeah, I think it's just like a fine card. Like if you're playing a deck that's like looking for specific stuff. If you're looking to, like mostly you're gonna want to play this if you care about specifically putting cards into your deck, right? Like if you are playing a deck that can take advantage of that, like Rogue with Stowaway, or if you're playing like, I don't know, maybe you're playing like a deck that like really needs to have certain cards like in the deck. I guess it's like you can't really use this because I was thinking it's like, okay, you really want to have like your Malagos in your deck for when you play like Deck of Lunacy or whatever. It's like, well, you can't do that because it's not gonna be the cheapest card in your deck. So probably not that many applications outside of like the Stowaway Rogue that I'm talking about. Overall, like I like the, like at worst case, right, you're cycling a card, right? You're getting rid of theoretically one of your weakest cards and drawing something else because it's one of your lowest cost cards. Maybe you're like generating, use this with like stuff that generates like bananas, right? You just like, get a banana in your hand and then you use your banana to draw a card, right? It definitely has applications, either, again, to help you try to get cards that you want out of your deck at specific times, or just like cycle through cheap, perhaps generated cards to find you other stuff. And it's also just a 1/3, right? Next up, we have Showstopper, a 2-cost 3/2 Death Rattle, silence all minions. Seems like silence is something that you very frequently want like on demand, right? So silence all minions attached to Death Rattle seems like it has potential. Obviously, this is potentially powerful against someone who's like a bunch of things in play. But the fact that it is a Death Rattle makes it a lot harder to actually use, which, is likely a good thing for neutral silence effects on a cheap body. Obviously, the potential to like rush this, but like that's, multi-card combo. Maybe you're playing this with like things that you want to silence of your own. This is like an Ancient Watcher. I can't really think of anything other than Ancient Watcher, and I guess there's like the spell damage version of Ancient Watcher that does exist right now. But overall, yeah, I think this is probably a pretty unlikely card to see tons of play, simply because, again, the fact that like usually when you want to silence, you want it now, right? Maybe you preemptively play this, or you play this against someone who has like, stuff that you really need to silence but isn't like really high pressure, like, I don't know, small Death Rattle minions or something. But it seems like it's hard to take advantage of it when you really, really need it. Obviously, you can use it with like your own removal spells to kill it yourself, but that's a pretty high bar to like build yourself a silence unless you're taking advantage of silencing your own stuff. So it seems like at best okay, but I'm like not really seeing it likely to see a lot of play. Most classes can find silence effects that are more reliable than that. Next up is Silas Darkmoon. This was the card I believe was free to everyone with the reveal. 7 cost 4/4 legendary battle cry. Choose a direction to rotate all minions. This is just like a weird card, like another like kind of wacky meme thing. Obviously, you can use it with like Doomsayer. You can use it to like try and steal your opponent's big things, steal all their buffs or whatever. But it's a pretty expensive card to actually do any of that. I don't really think there's any like actual like combos that win you the game straight up by like giving your opponent a minion. But I don't know, it's a pretty neat card. Obviously, like you can use it to like steal your opponent's stuff. You can use it like kind of as a mind control-ish effect, and that can be sweet. But obviously, like if this becomes a card that people actually play frequently, then people will also like play a lot around it, around it more. Like you'll have like middle, your Tyrion or whatever in the middle instead of on the left and right kind of thing. Obviously, there's lots of open-ended things you can do with it, and I think it's a cool card. But I doubt it's the sort of card that like we're gonna see, a ton of in like high-level competitive decks. It's certainly a weird and wacky and wild card, and especially in wild, where you can actually use it with stuff like what was that thing you'd always like treachery to people and then like make them discard their entire hand? I forget the name of it, but there's definitely lots of ways that you can take advantage of this and do kind of all kinds of cool things. So I'm sure we will see lots of highlight reels with Silas. Next up, we have Strongman, a 7 cost 6/6. Corrupt, this costs 0. This is a pretty interesting card. I doubt we'll see like a ton of it, right? Like it's very powerful in like a druid deck that's like you can use this with survival. You just like survival into strongman, 2 10 cost taunts for 0. Kind of cool. You can use it with guardian animals as well. It's like corridor creeper-ish if you are playing a bunch of big things. That's kind of neat, right? But like you have to cast an 8 or higher cost spell, right? And like that's asking a lot. Like if you're trying to play this in like say survival druid, what are you not playing, right? Because like a lot of those decks don't have like a ton of free space to just try and make the games in which you've already cast survival easier to win. Because usually you win when you play, the games where you like play survival and play like, just about anything else. It does make your turn where you play survival easier to win, easier to like not die. So maybe there's that. But it's probably, like a card that you ends up seeing play in like those ramp style decks. If it does, maybe in like a res priest deck, maybe this is a reasonable card because you cast like Plague of Death and then you can play Strongman in the same turn, and it's a decent thing to get off of a resurrection effect. But even then, it's just a lot, right? Like having to cast something that costs 8 or more in order for this to not be a terrible card, like just a 6/6 taunt for 7 is asking quite a bit. Maybe this ends up being played in like the spell druid decks, right? That like are looking to place what is it? Cenarian Call or whatever it is, the 8 cost thing that summons a thing and gives you armor. Maybe Twisting Nether and then play these out. There's definitely a lot of possible options for this for sure. I think a lot of those are kind of like dream scenarios where you're already in a decent spot. So like where you're alive to cast your big thing, and you don't really necessarily have the room in a lot of those decks to fit something like this that like, just takes advantage of what are already your powerful turns. But I could be wrong. I mean, anything that's cost reduction, as I've said, is powerful, and cost reduction to 0 is especially powerful. Next up, we have Wriggling Horror. 2 cost 2/1. Battle Cry, give adjacent minions +1/+1. Ooh, this could maybe be like a zoo style deck. Like it's quite a bit of buff stats off of a 2 cost card, right? +2/+2 effectively. This is like mini Fungalmancer, right? if you're playing like a deck that is likely to have multiple minions in play in the early game, this can really help them get out of, like win trades, get out of range of removal. You can play like typical zoo curve of like, Flame Imp, Coin, Voidwalker into this guy. It's a lot of pressure, and helping protect your minions can be really, really strong. Obviously, it's not like as high impact as Fungalmancer, but Fungalmancer was like a huge swing card, right? Fungalmancer was a card that like defined the ways that games played out. And I feel like this is not, obviously not as high impact, but it's a lot cheaper, can come down a lot faster, and can definitely swing games pretty heavily in any kind of minion-based matchup, or just against control if your minions go unchecked. So I think it's actually probably a pretty powerful card, despite not necessarily looking super strong at first glance. So I think that any kind of like swarm-style aggressive deck will definitely want to take a look at this card. Here he is, our Lord and Savior, Yogg-Saron, Master of Fate. What can I say about Yogg that has not been said already? He is great. Praise him, for he will spin the wheel, and he will give us our glorious reward for our faith in our Lord and Master, Yogg-Saron. You know, this is obviously... I've seen a lot of people talk about Yogg as if like Yogg is like somehow going to like ruin competitive Hearthstone. One of the things about Yogg that was so powerful before, right, was that Yogg was something that was a payoff that could like almost always get you out from games in which you're behind if you had like gotten to that point where you had 10 mana, even like no matter what sometimes, right? Like you could have like barely played any spells, and then you're like Yogg, and Yogg casts some super powerful thing. Yogg here, now, like, you have to have cast 10 spells for Yogg to be online at all. That's a lot. Like, 10's actually a lot of spells. You can't just, like, you know, Wild Growth into Overgrowth into Swipe into, oh god, I'm so far behind Yogg, right? Like, you have to have cast 10 spells and have 10 mana, which is a lot. That's a whole lot to actually get to that point where you're using it. So I think it's much less likely to be a card that's just like a, you know, go-to comeback mechanism in like any deck that can get there. Obviously, like in Mage, where you have like tons of spell generation, yeah, you can play Yogg. But like Yogg doesn't necessarily, or Mage doesn't necessarily get to 10 mana quite so easily, and has lots of ways to come back anyway, right? Mage has tons of tools that can allow you to come back in the game regardless. Yogg only really was like a card that saw a lot of play competitively. I'm not saying on like, you know, random ladder games. I obviously played Yogg in like tons of decks over time. But like competitively, you only really ever saw Yogg in like Druid, because Druid could ramp, and Druid was in a really bad position against any kind of aggressive deck that got ahead, and it could always use Yogg to come back and try and win those games. That's like not nearly as likely with this version of Yogg because of the variety of things that are possible on the wheel that you spin, as well as the fact that it requires 10 spells to be cast. So you can't just ramp Yogg after a few spells. So I don't think this is going to be a card that like ends up ruining constructed Magic, you know, in competitive play, like some people have like, you know, claimed after seeing the spoiler. It seems very unlikely that it actually sees a lot of play in like actual constructed competitive decks. It seems like much more likely to be a card that people just play because they want to play. Did I say Magic? Competitive Hearthstone. It's ruining Magic. Yogg is ruining Magic. Whatever. Yogg is ruining everything. He has such great power that he can reach into other games, grip the heart of them, and squeeze it out between his mighty many jaws. But anyway, Yogg's gonna be great. He's gonna be hilarious. We're gonna have people spamming the Yogglo emote in the chat. It's gonna be glorious. It's gonna cause so many sweet highlight reels. Like a lot of people who complained about, you know, a lot of people complained about Yogg, but a lot of people also loved Yogg more than anything back in the day. Yogg was like the reason that many YouTube channels basically existed, right? Like Yogg created so many crazy, hilarious moments. And then when Yogg eventually got nerfed, it was the saddest thing. They finally did go back and revert the nerf on Yogg. So if he died, he stopped casting, because that was just depressing. You'd like Yogg, he like assassinated himself, and you're like, oh, well, we built up to this, huh? And now, yes, Yogg can immediately end the game with Rod of Roasting, but it happens like 5% of the time, and that's sweet. You know, when that moment happens, it's going to be hilarious. But it's not going to happen any reasonable amount of time in competitive play, I don't think. I find it very unlikely it'll be a card that actually finds its way into competitive decks. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I find that unlikely, and I find that even if it is a card that sometimes shows up in competitive decks, it's not going to ruin competitive Hearthstone. But you know who will ruin Hearthstone? Yashiraj! No, he won't. The final card in Madness in the Darkmoon Faire, the final card for our final group of cards we are reviewing, neutral cards. Old Gods, Yashiraj the Defiler. 10 cost 10/10 with Battlecry. Add a copy of each corrupted card you've played this game to your hand. They cost 0 this turn. So one of the key things about this is they cost 0 this turn. It's not they cost 0, period. So they cost 0 this turn. So in order to use this card effectively, you need to have a lot of proactive things that you're doing with your corrupted stuff, like big corrupted minions. Maybe you're playing Yashiraj with the Carousel Griffin and the Rush Beast, and whatever, all these other like things that actually make minions on the board. It's obviously a very like powerful card if you get to this point, but it takes a lot, right? Like you have to have not only drawn the corrupted cards, corrupted them by playing something that cost more, played the corrupted card, and then played Yashiraj. I feel like this is, like a great card to explore, like a ton of different options and a ton of different classes, right? Because there's corrupt cards, I think, in every class. I think there's like at least one corrupt card in every class, and there's a bunch of corrupted neutral cards. And like the one that really like jumped out to me as far as like really powerful corrupted cards, like one of the ones that jumped out the most was like the Paladin card, the corrupted Griffin. But like, does Paladin have the tools to like play like this, like long game with like trying to, control the board, stay alive, player expensive stuff, player corrupted stuff? Maybe. Is that better than trying to like N'Zoth with a lot of those same cards? I don't know. But I love this style card, as I've said a number of times, that like, make you like look at with every class, kind of different angles of, well, do I want to play, this like Yashiraj Rection? I mean, you can even imagine playing a Yashiraj plus N'Zoth in like a deck that has, the big Rush Beast and like the Divine Shield mech and like, whatever other like, because I think there's got to be other corrupted like minion type things in there somewhere too. So I don't know. I think it's likely to be unlikely to be like a dominant card in the metagame, I feel like, but it does feel like it has the ability to like create these big, exciting swings. And I think that's something that Hearthstone really needs, right? I think that Hearthstone with the old gods, there's now 4 different old gods that all have like big game-defining, deck-defining things they do when you hit 10 mana. And that's cool. That's exciting. Big splashy stuff is one of the things that makes Hearthstone fun. And, there's still going to be people who are trying to smork you down before you get there, and it's going to work a lot of the time. But I'm here for the old gods. I'm here for the madness at the Darkmoon Faire. I'm here for the set. I'm really excited. This is probably one of the sets that I'm the most excited about in a very long time. I loved the metagame from Scholomance. I think that they did a great job keeping things fresh, keeping things, well balanced with proactive changes. And I'm really excited to see how things shape up with Madness at the Darkmoon Faire. And on top of that, we still got Battlegrounds and Duels. So it's a very exciting time, I think, to be a Hearthstone player, and I am very much looking forward to it. I got my ticket. I can't get it. It's behind that actual fair background that isn't a green screen. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching my review. Let me know what you think. Obviously, lots of people have lots of different opinions when it comes to new cards. I'm sure lots of people disagree with me, but it's okay. It's okay to be wrong. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will of course be streaming every day once the expansion comes out, playing all kinds of sweet new decks, as well as, of course, posting highlights from those games on my YouTube channel. So you won't want to miss any of it. Be sure to subscribe to me both on YouTube as well as on Twitch so you don't miss any of it. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.